Master word list. Words starting with letter G. Gadfly means an irritating person. For example, like a gadfly, he irritated all the guests at the hotel. Within 48 hours, everyone regarded him as an annoying busybody. Gaffe means social blunder. For example, according to Miss Manners, to call your husband by your lover's name is worse than a mere gaffe, it is a tactical mistake. Gainsay means deny. For example, she was too honest to gainsay the truth of the report. Gait means manner of walking or running. For example, the lame man walked with an uneven gait. Galaxy means large system of stars. For example, science fiction stories speculate about the possible existence of life in other galaxies. Gale means windstorm, emotional outburst. For example, the Weather Channel warned viewers about a rising gale, with winds of up to 60 miles per hour. Gall means bitterness, nerve. For example, the knowledge of his failure filled him with gall. Gall means annoy, chafe. For example, their taunts galled him. Galleon means large sailing ship. For example, the Spaniards pinned their hopes on the Galleon, the large warship, the British on the smaller and faster pinnace. Galvanize means stimulate by shock, stir up. For example, news that the prince was almost at their door galvanized the ugly stepsisters into a frenzy of combing and primping. Gambit means opening in chess in which a piece is sacrificed. For example, the player was afraid to accept his opponent's gambit because he feared a trap which as yet he could not see. Gambol means skip, leap playfully. For example, watching children gamble in the park is a pleasant experience. Gamely means bravely, with spirit. For example, because he had fought gamely against a much superior boxer, the crowd gave him a standing ovation when he left the arena. Gamut means entire range. For example, in this performance, the leading lady was able to demonstrate the complete gamut of her acting ability. Gape means open widely, stare open-mouthed. For example, the huge pit gaped before him. If he stumbled, he would fall in. Slack-jawed in wonder, Huck gaped at the huge stalactites hanging down from the ceiling of the limestone cavern. Garbled means mixed up, jumbled, distorted. For example, a favorite party game involves passing a whispered message from one person to another until, by the time it reaches the last player, the message is totally garbled. Gargantuan means huge, enormous. For example, the Gargantuan wrestler was terrified of mice. Garish means overbright in color, gaudy. For example, she wore a gaudy rhinestone necklace with an excessively garish gold lame dress. Garner means gather, store up. For example, she hoped to garner the world's literature in one library. Garnish means decorate. For example, parsley was used to garnish the boiled potato. Garrulous means loquacious, wordy, talkative. For example, my Uncle Henry can outtalk any 3 people I know. He is the most garrulous person in Cayuga County. Gauche means clumsy, coarse and uncouth. For example, compared to the sophisticated young ladies in their elegant gowns, tomboyish Joe felt gauche and out of place. Gaudy means flashy, showy. For example, the newest Trump skyscraper is typically gaudy, covered in gilded panels that gleam in the sun. Gaunt means lean and angular, barren. For example, his once round face looked surprisingly gaunt after he had lost weight. Gavel means hammer-like tool. For example, sold, cried the auctioneer, banging her gavel on the table to indicate she'd accepted the final bid. Gawk means stare foolishly. For example, the country boy gawked at the skyscrapers and neon lights of the big city. Genealogy means record of descent, lineage. For example, he was proud of his genealogy and constantly referred to the achievements of his ancestors. Generality means vague statement. For example, this report is filled with generalities. Be more specific in your statements. Generate means cause, produce, create. For example, in his first days in office, President Clinton managed to generate a new mood of optimism. We just hoped he could generate some new jobs. Generic means characteristic of an entire class or species. For example, Sue knew so many computer programmers who spent their spare time playing fantasy games that she began to think that playing Dungeons and Dragons was a generic trait. Genesis means beginning, origin. For example, tracing the genesis of a family is the theme of Roots. Geniality means cheerfulness, kindliness, sympathy. For example, this restaurant is famous and popular because of the geniality of the proprietor who tries to make everyone happy. Genre means particular variety of art or literature. For example, both a short story writer and a poet, Langston Hughes proved himself equally skilled in either genre. Genteel means well-bred, elegant. For example, we are looking for a man with a genteel appearance who can inspire confidence by his cultivated manner. Gentility means those of gentle birth, refinement. For example, her family was proud of its gentility and elegance. Gentry means class of people just below nobility. For example, the local gentry did not welcome the visits of the summer tourists and tried to ignore their presence in the community. Germane means pertinent, bearing upon the case at hand. For example, the judge refused to allow the testimony to be heard by the jury because it was not germane to the case. Germinal means pertaining to a germ, creative. For example, such an idea is germinal. I am certain that it will influence thinkers and philosophers for many generations. Germinate means cause to sprout. For example, after the seeds germinate and develop their permanent leaves, the plants may be removed from the cold frames and transplanted to the garden. Gesticulation means motion, gesture. For example, operatic performers are trained to make exaggerated gesticulations because of the large auditoriums in which they appear. Ghastly means horrible. For example, the murdered man was a ghastly sight. Gibberish means nonsense, babbling. For example, did you hear that fool boy spouting gibberish about monsters from outer space? Jibe means mock. For example, as you jibe at their superstitious beliefs, do you realize that you, too, are guilty of similarly foolish thoughts? Giddy means light-hearted, dizzy. For example, he felt his giddy youth was past. Gingerly means very carefully. For example, to separate egg whites, first crack the egg gingerly. Girth means circumference. For example, it took an extra-large cummerbund to fit around Andrew Carnegie's considerable girth. Gist means essence. For example, she was asked to give the gist of the essay in 2 sentences. Glacial means, like a glacier, extremely cold. For example, never a warm person, when offended John could seem positively glacial. Glaring means, highly conspicuous, harshly bright. For example, glaring spelling or grammatical errors in your resume will unfavorably impress potential employers. Glaze means, cover with a thin and shiny surface. For example, the freezing rain glazed the streets and made driving hazardous. Glib means, fluent, facile, slick. For example, keeping up a steady patter to entertain his customers, the kitchen gadget salesman was a glib speaker, never at a loss for a word. Glimmer means, shine erratically, twinkle. For example, in the darkness of the cavern, the glowworms hanging from the cavern roof glimmered like distant stars. Gloat means, express evil satisfaction. For example, as you gloat over your ill-gotten wealth, do you think of the many victims you have defrauded? Glossary means, brief explanation of words used in the text. For example, I have found the glossary in this book very useful. It has eliminated many trips to the dictionary. Gloss over means, explain away. For example, no matter how hard he tried to talk around the issue, President Bush could not gloss over the fact that he had raised taxes after all. Glossy means, smooth and shining. For example, I want this photograph printed on glossy paper, not matte. Glower means, scowl. For example, the angry boy glowered at his father. Glut means, overstock, fill to excess. For example, the many manufacturers glutted the market and could not find purchasers for the excess articles they had produced. Glutton means, someone who eats too much. For example, when Mother saw that Bobby had eaten all the cookies, she called him a little glutton. Gnarled means twisted. For example, the gnarled oak tree had been a landmark for years and was mentioned in several deeds. Gnome means dwarf, underground spirit. For example, in medieval mythology, gnomes were the special guardians and inhabitants of subterranean mines. Goad means urge on. For example, he was goaded by his friends until he yielded to their wishes. Gorge means small, steep-walled canyon. For example, the Whitewater Rafting Guide warned us about the rapids farther downstream, where the river cut through a narrow gorge. Gorge means stuff oneself. For example, the gluttonous guest gorged himself with food as though he had not eaten for days. Gory means bloody. For example, the audience shuddered as they listened to the details of the gory massacre. Gouge means tear out. For example, in that fight, all the rules were forgotten, the adversaries bit, kicked, and tried to gouge each other's eyes out. Gourmand means person who takes excessive pleasure in food and drink. For example, gourmands lack self-restraint. If they enjoy a particular cuisine, they eat far too much of it. Gourmet means connoisseur of food and drink. For example, the gourmet stated that this was the best onion soup she had ever tasted. Graduated means arranged by degrees. For example, Margaret loved her graduated set of Russian hollow wooden dolls. She spent hours happily putting the smaller dolls into their larger counterparts. Graft means portion of plant inserted in another plant. For example, after the fire, Greg required skin grafts to replace the badly damaged areas on his forearms. Grandeur means impressiveness, stateliness, majesty. For example, no matter how often he hiked through the mountains, David never failed to be struck by the grandeur of the Sierra Nevada range. Grandiloquent means pompous, bombastic. For example, the politician could never speak simply, she was always grandiloquent. Grandiose means pretentious, ridiculously exaggerated. For example, the aged matinee idol still had grandiose notions of his supposed importance in the theatrical world. Granulate means form into grains. For example, sugar that has been granulated dissolves more readily than lump sugar. Graphic means pertaining to the art of delineating. For example, I was particularly impressed by the graphic presentation of the storm. Grapple means wrestle, come to grips with. For example, he grappled with the burglar and overpowered him. Grate means make a harsh noise, have an unpleasant effect. For example, the screams of the quarreling children grated on her nerves. Gratify means please. For example, Lori's parents were gratified by her successful performance on the SAT. Gratis means free. For example, the company offered to give one package gratis to every purchaser of one of their products. Gratuitous means given freely, uncalled for. For example, quit making gratuitous comments about my driving. No one asked you for your opinion. Gravity means seriousness. For example, we could tell we were in serious trouble from the gravity of the principal's expression. Gregarious means sociable. For example, typically, partygoers are gregarious, hermits are not. Grievance means cause of complaint. For example, when her supervisor ignored her complaint, she took her grievance to the union. Grill means question severely. For example, in violation of the Miranda law, the police grilled the suspect for several hours before reading him his rights. Grimace means disgust. For example, even though he remained silent, his grimace indicated his displeasure. Grisly means ghastly. For example, she shuddered at the grisly sight. Grouse means complain, fuss. For example, students traditionally grouse about the abysmal quality of mystery meat and similar dormitory food. Grotesque means fantastic, comically hideous. For example, on Halloween people enjoy wearing grotesque costumes. Grove means group of trees, orchard. For example, to the child, the small grove of oaks was as vast as Sherwood Forest, in which he played that legendary hero, Robin Hood. Grovel means crawl or creep on ground, remain prostrate. For example, even though we have been defeated, we do not have to grovel before our conquerors. Grudging means unwilling, reluctant. For example, we received only grudging support from the mayor despite his earlier promises of aid. Gruel means liquid food made by boiling oatmeal. For example, our daily allotment of gruel made the meal not only monotonous, but also unpalatable. Grueling means exhausting. For example, the marathon is a grueling race. Gruesome means horrible. For example, his face was the stuff of nightmares. All the children in the audience screamed when Freddy Krueger's gruesome countenance was flashed on the screen. Gruff means rough-mannered. For example, although he was blunt and gruff with most people, he was always gentle with children. Guffaw means boisterous laughter. For example, the loud guffaws that came from the closed room indicated that the members of the committee had not yet settled down to serious business. Guile means deceit, duplicity. For example, Lego uses considerable guile to trick Othello into believing that Desdemona has been unfaithful. Guileless means without deceit. For example, he is naive, simple, and guileless, he cannot be guilty of fraud. Guise means appearance, costume. For example, in the guise of a plumber, the detective investigated the murder case. Gullible means easily deceived. For example, overly gullible people have only themselves to blame if they fall for con artists repeatedly. Gustatory means affecting the sense of taste. For example, the Thai restaurant offered an unusual gustatory experience for those used to a bland cuisine. Gusto means enjoyment, enthusiasm. For example, he accepted the assignment with such gusto that I feel he would have been satisfied with a smaller salary. Gusty means windy. For example, the gusty weather made sailing precarious. End of the word list with words starting with letter G.